I met Jake when I was just 22. He was everything I thought I wanted in a partner: handsome, funny, and kind. We met at a party thrown by a mutual friend, and it didn't take long for us to click. We spent hours talking, laughing, and sharing stories. He had this warmth about him that made everyone feel like they were the most important person in the room. I was drawn to that, to how easily he made me feel safe. We started dating soon after, and in those early days, everything felt perfect. We went on dates, spent weekends together, and made all kinds of future plans. Jake was the kind of guy who always talked about the future, always made plans for us as a couple, and I loved that. It made me feel secure, like I was finally with someone who was serious, someone who saw a future with me. After a year of dating, we moved in together. It felt like the natural next step. We were inseparable, and living together only made that bond stronger. We fell into a routine, cooking dinners together, binge-watching TV shows, making weekend plans. It was the kind of relationship I had always imagined. But then, things started to change, and I didn't know how to handle it. Jake was amazing, but there were moments when I felt lost. I was young, still figuring out who I was, and for the first time in my life, I was with someone who expected me to be everything. And I didn't know if I could be. I started pulling away, emotionally, though I didn't want to admit it to myself. I'd never been good at facing my own shortcomings, and when the cracks started to show in my relationship with Jake, I panicked. It was during one of these moments of doubt that I made a mistake, a huge mistake. I met someone else. It started innocently enough. A late night at the bar, a few too many drinks, and a guy who listened to me in a way I hadn't felt in months. He was different. He wasn't Jake, but for that brief moment, I felt seen. It didn't take long for that innocent flirtation to turn into something more. I convinced myself it wasn't a big deal. I told myself that it didn't matter because Jake and I were going through a rough patch. But the truth was, I was looking for an escape, a way to fill a hole inside me that I couldn't quite understand. The affair lasted a few months. It wasn't that I didn't care about Jake, because I did, but I was afraid. Afraid that I wasn't good enough, afraid that I'd lose myself in this relationship and forget who I was. The guilt started to creep in, but I pushed it away. I told myself it wasn't a big deal. That I could go back to Jake and everything would be fine. I convinced myself I could keep the secret forever. And then I found out I was pregnant. At first, I didn't know how to react. I wasn't sure who the father was, Jake or the other guy. I didn't even want to think about it. The idea of telling Jake, of having to admit what I had done, was terrifying. But at the same time, there was a part of me that wanted him to be the father. I wanted things to go back to the way they were before everything got so complicated. I convinced myself that no matter what, Jake would be there. After all, he had always talked about wanting a family. When I found out for sure that Jake wasn't the father, I panicked. The pregnancy had already put me in a vulnerable place, but this was worse. I knew I couldn't hide it forever, but I kept telling myself it didn't matter. Jake would never find out. It was just a mistake, and everything could go back to normal if I just kept quiet. I had a baby to raise, and I convinced myself that lying was the best way to protect everyone. But, deep down, I knew I was already lost. I was trapped in a lie, one that I couldn't escape from. I thought I could laugh it off, that I could somehow make everything okay again. But I didn't realize just how much I was about to lose. The night everything changed started like any other. Jake and I had just finished dinner, takeout from our favorite place, as usual, and we were sitting on the couch, scrolling through our phones, mindlessly chatting about nothing important. But something felt off. I could sense that Jake wasn't his usual self, though he didn't say anything. He was quieter than usual, more distant. I tried to brush it off. Maybe he was just tired from work, or maybe I was just overthinking things. But then, something happened that I wasn't expecting at all. We were talking about random things, and he casually mentioned a friend of ours, Mark. Mark was someone we both knew from college, and I didn't think much of him. He was one of those guys who always had something to say, always made a point to get into other people's business. That's when Jake dropped the bomb. "Mark told me something strange today," Jake said, looking at his phone screen, avoiding my gaze. "He said he saw you with another guy, a few months ago. Said he was the one who drove you home after that night at the bar." The words hit me like a punch to the gut. My stomach turned, and I felt the blood drain from my face. My first instinct was to laugh it off, to pretend like it didn't mean anything, but I could see the way Jake was looking at me. His eyes were cold, calculating. He wasn't joking. He knew. I tried to play it cool. "Mark doesn't know what he's talking about," I said, forcing a smile. "It was nothing, really. Just a misunderstanding." But Jake didn't buy it. "It's not just that," he said quietly, his voice thick with emotion. "I've been thinking a lot, Em. About everything. And I've started to wonder if the baby's even mine." The words hit me harder than I could have imagined. It was like time stopped. I felt my heart race, my hands tremble. How could he know? I hadn't told him about the other guy. I hadn't told anyone, really. But somehow, he knew. I wanted to deny it, to tell him that everything was fine, that the baby was his, but the truth was staring me in the face, and I couldn't escape it. I had been living with this secret for so long, and now it was unraveling before me. I tried to look calm, but inside, I was panicking. "Jake, no," I said quickly, but my voice faltered. "You're the only one I've been with. I swear." But Jake was looking at me with those eyes, the eyes of someone who had been betrayed. He wasn't listening to my words, he was listening to the silence in between them. "Don't lie to me, Emily," he said, his voice so cold it sent shivers down my spine. "I know the truth. And I've known for a while. The baby isn't mine, is it?" My heart dropped. In that moment, I knew there was no going back. I had crossed a line I couldn't uncross. Jake had figured it out, and there was no way to fix it. I felt like I was suffocating. How had he known? Was it the way I acted? The way I avoided certain questions? Or maybe he had seen something in me that I hadn't even noticed, a guilt I carried in my every word and gesture. I opened my mouth to say something, anything, but the words wouldn't come. I could feel the weight of everything crashing down on me, the affair, the lies, the betrayal. The love I had for Jake felt so distant in that moment, like a dream I could never get back. Jake stood up slowly, shaking his head. "I don't even know who you are anymore, Emily. I thought I knew you. But now I don't know if I can ever trust you again." I watched him walk out of the living room, his footsteps heavy, his anger palpable in the air. My mind was spinning, trying to process what had just happened. How did I let it go this far? How could I have been so careless with the one person who loved me unconditionally? And then, in the silence that followed, I realized the truth. I had lost him. I had lost Jake. The man I thought I would build a life with, the father of my child, was slipping away, and I had no one to blame but myself. The laughter that had once been my defense now felt like a distant memory, a cruel joke. The days after that night were a blur. I hardly slept, barely ate, and couldn't stop replaying the conversation in my head. Every word Jake had said haunted me. "The baby isn't mine." I couldn't shake those words. I had never felt more alone than I did in those moments, drowning in a sea of regret. I tried to call him. I texted him, begged him to come back and talk. But Jake had shut me out completely. He wouldn't answer my calls, wouldn't respond to my messages. He had left the apartment the night of the confrontation and didn't come back. I knew he was staying with a friend, Mark, I assumed, or someone from his work, but that didn't make me feel any better. The guilt was eating me alive, but there was nothing I could do to fix it. I couldn't take back the lies, couldn't erase the betrayal. And now, it was clear, I had pushed him too far. Days passed, and I was still in limbo. The house felt empty without him, like it had been drained of all warmth and life. I tried to focus on the pregnancy, tried to prepare for the baby that was coming, but every time I thought about it, I felt a crushing sense of shame. This baby was supposed to be a symbol of the future Jake and I had talked about, of our plans and dreams. But now, it was just a reminder of how badly I had messed up. I knew I had to face him. I couldn't keep running from the truth, no matter how painful it was. So, after a few more days of silence, I showed up at his friend's apartment. I knocked on the door, my hands trembling, my heart racing in my chest. I wasn't sure what I expected to find, but I knew it had to happen. Jake needed to hear the truth from me, even if it would tear us apart. When he opened the door, I saw the hardness in his eyes before anything else. There was no warmth, no softness. He looked like a stranger, someone I didn't recognize. "What do you want?" His voice was flat, emotionless, and it made my stomach turn. He wasn't angry, not anymore, but the coldness in his tone was worse than any rage he could have unleashed. "Jake, please, just let me explain," I said, my voice breaking. I felt like I was begging, but I didn't care. I had to make him understand, even if it meant losing him for good. He didn't move, didn't even step aside. He just stood there, blocking the door, looking at me with a look that was almost pitying. "Explain? What is there to explain, Emily? You lied to me. You cheated on me. And now, the baby isn't even mine." I closed my eyes for a moment, letting the weight of his words sink in. "I made a mistake," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "A huge mistake. I didn't mean for it to happen. I didn't mean to hurt you. I was scared. I was confused, and I wasn't thinking. But it wasn't about you. It was about me, and how lost I felt." He didn't say anything for a long time, just stared at me with that same cold expression. I could see the pain in his eyes, but there was no forgiveness there, no understanding. I had betrayed him, and now, there was no coming back from it. Finally, he spoke. "You think an apology is going to fix this? You think I can just forget everything? I trusted you, Emily. I gave you everything. And you." He trailed off, shaking his head. "I don't even know who you are anymore." The words stung, and I felt a tear slip down my cheek. I wiped it away quickly, ashamed. "I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, Jake. But I need you to understand. I never wanted to hurt you. I love you. I always have. I messed up. I made the biggest mistake of my life. But I'm still here. I'm still trying. And if there's any chance at all that we can fix this, I'll do whatever it takes." For a moment, there was silence between us. His gaze softened just slightly, but the hardness never fully disappeared. I could tell he was torn, caught between the person he once loved and the person I had become. But then, he stepped back, his shoulders sagging with exhaustion. "I don't know if I can ever trust you again, Emily. And I don't know if I want to try." He closed the door gently, without slamming it, but the finality of it hit me harder than I could have imagined. I stood there for a few moments, feeling like I had been hit by a truck. This was it. There was no going back. As I walked away from the apartment, I felt the weight of my actions crushing me. The man I had loved was gone, and in his place was a stranger who would never look at me the same way again. I had destroyed everything we had, and now, all I could do was carry the burden of my mistakes. The days after our confrontation dragged on, each one heavier than the last. I was left alone, trying to fill the silence of my apartment, but nothing could make the weight of the situation feel any lighter. Jake was gone from my life, gone from our home, and every time I thought about it, a cold emptiness washed over me. I had lost him. I had lost everything. I couldn't stop thinking about the baby, the one thing that still connected me to Jake. But it was so hard to look at the small bump in my belly without feeling a deep sense of regret. I had wanted this baby, I had dreamed of it for years. But now, with everything that had happened, I wasn't sure if I even deserved to be a mother. How could I bring a child into this mess, knowing I had betrayed the man who was supposed to be by my side through it all? And yet, there was a strange comfort in the idea of the baby, maybe because it was the only thing left that was still mine, that wasn't tainted by my mistakes. It was a reminder that, despite everything, life moved forward. But even that small comfort wasn't enough to shake the feeling that everything I had once known was slipping through my fingers, piece by piece. Jake didn't contact me after that day. He didn't reach out to check on me, to see if I was okay, and honestly, I didn't expect him to. I had made my bed, and now I had to lie in it. But there were moments, rare moments, when I wondered if I would ever hear from him again, if he would ever forgive me. And then, there were other moments, darker moments, when I realized that forgiveness might never come. The trust between us had been shattered, and some things were just too broken to be fixed. Weeks passed, and I started to face the reality of the situation. I had to go to appointments on my own, navigate the challenges of pregnancy without Jake's support. There were days when I felt like I couldn't do it. I was scared, I was lonely, and I was overwhelmed by the idea of raising a child by myself. I didn't know how to be a single mother. I didn't know how to be anything anymore. And then, one day, as I was leaving a prenatal checkup, I got a call. It was from Jake's number. My heart skipped a beat, but I hesitated. I wasn't sure if I was ready for this. I wasn't sure if I was ready to face the consequences of my actions. But I answered anyway. "Hello?" I said, my voice trembling. "Emily," Jake's voice came through the phone, steady but distant. "I've been thinking about everything. About the baby, about us." My stomach dropped. I hadn't expected him to call, let alone open up like this. "Jake, he cut me off. I don't know if I'm ready to forgive you. I don't know if I ever will be. But, the baby is mine too, Emily. And I can't just walk away from that. I've made mistakes, but I can't leave you to do this alone." The words hit me like a punch to the chest. I had expected anger, resentment, maybe even hate, but what I heard was something else. I heard a man who was hurting, a man who was still struggling with the pain I had caused him, but who also understood that the baby was a part of him. I swallowed hard, trying to hold back the tears that were threatening to spill. "I never wanted you to leave," I said softly. "I never wanted to hurt you. I love you, Jake. I always have. And I know I can't take back what I did, but I'm asking you to give me a chance. For the baby. For us." There was a long silence on the other end of the line, and I thought for a moment he might hang up, that he might walk away for good. But then he spoke again, his voice a little softer. "I don't know if we can fix this, Emily. But I'll try. For the baby. We can't undo the past, but maybe we can figure out what comes next." My heart fluttered at his words, but I knew this wasn't an easy fix. The road ahead was going to be hard, and I couldn't expect everything to go back to how it was before. But this was a start. Jake hadn't given up on me completely. And maybe, just maybe, there was still hope for us. That night, I lay in bed, staring up at the ceiling, wondering what the future held. There were no guarantees. There was still so much to rebuild, so many things that needed to be said and done. But for the first time in a long while, I felt a flicker of hope. Maybe I wasn't completely alone after all. Maybe, just maybe, we could figure it out together. The days that followed Jake's call were filled with uncertainty. I didn't know what he truly meant by trying. What did that even look like? We hadn't even begun to address the mess we'd made of our relationship, and yet here we were, forced to move forward because of the baby. I didn't want it to be like this, but I knew I had to be strong. For the baby. For Jake, if there was still something worth saving between us. We started seeing each other again, but it wasn't like before. There was no warmth, no easy affection. It was tense. We would sit across from each other, awkwardly navigating conversations, talking only about the baby, the practical things. I could see the sadness in Jake's eyes when he looked at me. And I felt it too. We were both different now, both changed by the things we had done. But slowly, something started to shift. It wasn't a sudden thing, but over the course of a few weeks, Jake began to show up more often. He came with me to my doctor's appointments, asking questions, offering support in his own quiet way. We would spend time together, but it was always measured, always cautious. I kept wondering if we were building something new or just stalling, afraid to face the true depth of our brokenness. Then came the night that everything changed. I was lying in bed, unable to sleep as usual, staring at the ceiling, lost in my thoughts, when I heard a knock at the door. It was late, almost midnight, and I wasn't expecting anyone. I hesitated for a moment, my heart racing. Was it Jake? My nerves flared at the possibility of another conversation about the baby, about us, about what we were becoming. But when I opened the door, I wasn't prepared for what I saw. Jake stood there, holding a small, wrapped package. His eyes were red-rimmed, and his face was drawn, but there was something in his expression, something vulnerable, something raw, that I had never seen before. "I know I've been distant," he said, his voice shaky. "I've been trying to figure out how to move past this, how to fix things. But I've realized something. I don't want to do this alone, and I don't want you to do this alone either. The baby deserves more than just two broken people, Emily. It deserves two parents who are willing to fight for it." I stood there, speechless, staring at him as the weight of his words sank in. Was he saying what I thought he was saying? Was he offering us a chance? He reached out, handing me the package. I opened it slowly, revealing a small stuffed animal, a teddy bear, soft and worn-looking. It was simple, but it was the most thoughtful gesture I had ever received. "I don't know if this will fix everything," Jake continued, his voice softer now, almost like a whisper. "But I want to try, Emily. For the baby. For us. I don't know where we're going, but I don't want to let you go. Not like this." I could feel the tears welling up in my eyes as I held the teddy bear in my hands. The warmth of his words, the sincerity, hit me harder than I expected. He had hurt me, and I had hurt him, but here we were, standing in the midst of all the pain, still willing to try. "I want to try too, Jake," I said, my voice trembling. "I don't know if we can fix everything, but I don't want to give up either." For the first time in a long time, Jake smiled, a small, uncertain smile, but it was a smile nonetheless. And in that moment, something inside me shifted. Maybe we couldn't undo the past, but we could build something new, something stronger. We didn't have all the answers, but we had each other. And maybe that was enough. As he stepped closer, I could feel the tension between us ease, even if only for a moment. We didn't have a perfect future waiting for us, but we had a chance to heal, to grow, to build something better for our baby. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel quite so alone.